Got to watch out for inflation. Inflation sounds like things should be rising. Apparently, money's flaccid. Increase your purchasing power with some Viagra, you know? It's a little green pill that keeps your money erect. Yeah. Plus, inflation's just killing all of our made-up stuff. Like the tooth fairy. How much are we supposed to leave now? My nephew was complaining the other day about some coins he got from the tooth fairy. I'm like, oh, bud, you got some coins? Why are you upset about that? He goes, well, Jeremy got $10. I'm like, well, Jeremy's dad's an asshole that's ruining it for the rest of us. Is renting really throwing away money? Should everybody own a home? If you do buy a home, what's the right price and how much can you really afford? What are the surprise expenses that can come along? And also, what impact does the economy and uncertainty have to do with this entire decision-making process? Well, I remember when I bought my first home after getting married, there was this water softener salesman that came to the door. He wanted to sell me, but I wasn't hearing it. I was a miser. I'm like, no way. So he was smart enough to come back when I wasn't home. We got my wife on board. Wow, pretty smart. Yeah, we ended up finding out how much it cost to do it, and we did it. We also had to figure out how to put in a yard because there was no yard when we bought this house. We had to buy furniture. We had to get garage door openers. Those weren't included. We even had to add a mailbox. All these things were not included in new build. So there was the price of the home, and then there's also the payment. But that payment has taxes and insurance and other things I didn't necessarily consider when first calculating the cost of this home. Plus, there was an unfinished basement. It flooded multiple times, thankfully, before we finished it. And we did eventually finish that, which cost more than I expected. So let me help anyone considering buying a property to live in or invest in so you can be better prepared and even know if it's the right move for you. So there's multiple things to consider when buying a home. There's even maintenance. We find out there's certain issues that we got to fix with the sprinkling system, and I don't know, there's always seems to be something. We even had to fix something with the air conditioning unit. So just realize when you're renting, I'm not very good or very handy with maintenance. Other people would take care of it. Now it's kind of on me. So that's an additional expense. But you might look at, in like how my wife did, is it a creative outlet? Is it something that you really value? Because I don't consider the home that you live in a asset necessarily. I mean, it is on your balance sheet, but it's probably not creating cash flow for you. My wife would never rent this out on an Airbnb or VRBO, so we could never get cash flow, even if we were gone for a period of time. So it's not really a cash flowing asset that helps towards economic independence, but it's an asset that might just help you with a quality of life. When we moved into our first home, my wife could then garden, and she added all these flowers. It just really was a nice situation, as I mentioned before. But again, when we had our apartment, we couldn't really do all that kind of stuff, and we didn't own stuff, so we weren't changing paint or, enhancing, like putting things that were permanent fixtures like lights. When you buy a home, one of the things to consider is, yes, there is potential appreciation, but there's also depreciation. Homes can go up in value. We've seen it, especially during the pandemic. It was crazy how much homes skyrocketed because of really low interest rates and high demand as people kind of left cities and went, kind of to other more rural areas to a degree. So when I say depreciate, and this definitely happens with paint and carpet and even electronics, there's something called planned obsolescence. Things break down and you have to replace them. But homes can also lose value when interest rates go up, because interest rates determine our payment. If that payment goes up, a lot of people are buying based upon that payment, not based upon the price. Maybe one employer goes out of business, that makes a huge difference. Or due to other economic downturns that are more global in nature, that could impact overall housing prices as well. So this is just something to take into consideration, because it could be risky if you're not sure if you're going to stay in the home for very long, right? If you're not going to stay in the home for very long, it might be even more sensitive of when you go to sell if there's a change in the marketplace. We've seen here in 2022 that home prices have really started to come down, and in certain areas drastically come down. I have a business partner in Canada. He sends me articles where some homes have lost 40% in just the last few months. Even if it's long term, it's not always the case that homes just go up in value. The first home that I bought with my wife I loved it. It was a great home. Rambler or ranch style. We loved the layout. But then a developer bought all the lots behind us and then built these homes that you look out and they're just right in your face, blocking our entire view of the mountains. So with that, it actually started to harm the value of our home. So, they built right on top of us figuratively, but that's how it felt. And so that was a lower value because of that. Now, for some people, when they rent, they're like, okay, I'm always have to pay that rent. But others eventually can pay off a mortgage. It's like, great, no longer having a payment can feel great. So when someone rents, there's always rent due. In some areas, there might be rent controls like New York City, but rents really have increased overall in the past few years. So by having a home, you have a fixed payment, you might be able to eliminate that mortgage and no longer have a payment, or just keep that payment where it's predictable over the next 15 or 30 years. But what are the other costs to consider? Again, we mentioned maintenance costs, right? And when I say we, it was me that mentioned it. But you can invest the savings or difference between mortgage and rent, right? So if you rent and you're like, oh, this is lower than having a mortgage, you can save up that money and then maybe eventually pay cash for a home if it doesn't appreciate too much, or just have money that's there for you to build stability or invest back into yourself. But sometimes in really low interest rate environments, people are able to get a home for a lower payment than rent. But again, that's only part of the picture because there's property taxes and other things like that. And I will say that a lot of times if you're buying, there's better options than just renting, because a lot of renting has to do with apartments. But if you want to rent a home, often the inventory for renting a home, there's a lower inventory than buying homes. So you might have more choice if you're looking to buy. So what are some of the cons though? Well, if you're buying a home, it takes time to get the loan. It's the amount of money you might have to put down, right? What's your down payment? And that's no longer available to earn interest or be there in your life. Now all the things that you'd have to be responsible for, that you weren't with rent. And there's also closing costs. So you have title fees and fees for the mortgage brokers and things like that. So just take into consideration some of those things. Now, in your payment, you also will have property taxes. And the home I'm in right now filming in, well, a contractor lived here and his wife was the realtor, and they fixed this up and did a great job. But their property taxes were lower than when I bought, because now I bought it shows a much higher payment than what their purchase price than what they paid for it. And so the property taxes almost doubled. And in some states, there might not be any state tax, but there's high property taxes. So you want to look at your property taxes and if they're going to go up. Homeowners insurance is something that is usually more expensive than renter's insurance as well, because now it's responsibility for the structure, not just the contents inside of that structure. Probably not the biggest consideration, but I'm just trying to give you a basic checklist, and maybe you already have this, so it might be really good for your kids or for other people that are looking to do this. So we've mentioned before, I don't know why I keep saying we. I'm like, it's like when people mention themselves in the third person. Well, Garrett Gunderson says, well, I'm Garrett, so I don't know we, but I mentioned earlier, fixing things yourself. Like, I know I look like Jesus, but I'm just no good at carpentry. So when we bought that first home, I was like, okay, now we have to put in a mailbox. What do we got to do about that? The unfinished basement, we finished that, and I went a little overboard. So it was actually nicer than our upstairs, crazy enough. Had a kegerator and an extra fridge, and we had a whole place to play, ping pong and pool. Then we had a movie theater room. It was pretty awesome. Like, you don't need to hear that much about it, but it was awesome. But we didn't get money dollar for dollar of what we put into the basement when we actually sold the home. So this actually it wasn't a good investment from a money standpoint. It was just kind of a nice quality of life thing. But when I sold that home, because I refinanced after finishing the basement, I had to sell it for less than I owed on it because of all the properties that had been built up around us, removing our view and being a little bit crowded. Be mindful too that, when I put in the yard and when I did a lot of this stuff, contractors very often bid very low to get the job, but then give you a bunch of options for upgrades that were a lot of times unexpected, and those expenses with the job start to go up. So we put in the yard, but they didn't have the right draining system, so it was flooding our basement, so we had to go back and had this additional piece. And then when we want to do certain things, they're like, well, you could do it that way or this way. And it was always better when it was this way and more expensive. So be careful with that. Market fluctuations when you're buying is another big thing to consider, especially during they're just really crazy economic times, that there could be really wild swings right now. It's simple supply and demand. If there's not a lot of supply and a high demand, the price goes up. Or interest rate changes could definitely, interest rate goes up, the value of homes can start to go down because people are buying on that, or where it's located, as I mentioned before. We end up furnishing it, and that takes a lot of time and money. So right now, even when you're trying to buy furniture, you don't have to pay up front. And this furniture we just got for this house took a year's time to get here. A year. So that's another thing to consider. And with the home, you're going to have that planned obsolescence with water heaters, water softeners, air conditioners, fridges. They're going to have to be replaced when you're not just renting. So things break, replace them. Now it's on you. So before buying a home, let me give you this quick and simple checklist of the critical pieces. Number one, have at least 3 months of savings after your down payment to cover unexpected things that can come up just in your own life. And so you have, 6 months is better, but I know that could be a little bit tough. Number two, make sure you have a down payment of at least 20%, because if you have 20%, you don't have to pay private mortgage insurance. I know you can get a second mortgage to avoid private mortgage insurance, but that's usually a higher interest rate than your primary mortgage. So that's kind of a thing. Number three, you're going to want 5% or up to 10% of your purchase price for furniture, improving the yard, fixing things, improving things, replacing things, adding things. We changed doors in this home. Doors were added to this office because I'm so loud you could hear me through the whole house. We replaced a floor for my gym, got a gym mirror, storage shelves all over in the garage, changed the lighting fixtures I mentioned before. So these are the kind of things that a lot of times you don't think about until you're in it. Now, look at your property taxes. Will they go up upon purchase? Look at what was previously paid if it's an already existing home versus if there's been improvements, so that you can kind of estimate there. Look at everything on the closing costs. There's a page or two when you go to get the mortgage. What are your real estate commissions, title fees, closing costs, all that kind of stuff to be considered. And then changing interest rates is really going to impact the timing and what's happening. There's a lot of people right now trying to do adjustable rate mortgages because the interest rates have gone up. But adjustable means in the future, if they go up even further, your payment's going to go up. Now, with inflation, maybe that won't matter as much. When it comes to finding a home, location absolutely matters. Location, even in the time where this market was so hot when we bought this home. We looked at a home that was beautiful. It was amazing, but it was right off of I-215, a very major freeway that you could then hear. And I'm like, oh, well, no wonder this has been on the market for 63 days where everything else is on the market for 7 days, right? So location definitely matters. Go in knowing what you're willing to invest and reduce that by 10% at least to account for everything mentioned above. Because if it's like, okay, I can get this home for $2,500 a month, but you're not looking at property taxes and insurance and all these other things, reduce what you're willing to spend by 10 so that you have a little bit of buffer, right? So I'm going to do $2,200. But then you find out, okay, that extra $300 ends up still being there with all these unexpected things. Conservatively, if you were to do this in the best way possible when you're buying a home, make sure it's no more than 2 times your gross annual income. I know that'd be ideal. It's probably not possible because the market has skyrocketed, but that would be ideal. Outside of that, just realize you're taking a more risk as you go beyond that, but it might absolutely be required. This is going to be really hard for anyone starting out, someone on a fixed income, and it really depending on where you live. Some places, housing still isn't all that expensive, but other places, like in metropolitan cities, it's extraordinarily expensive, and even rents have gone up because of inflation. So with a home, it usually isn't going to help you create financial independence. It's not an asset that kicks off cash flow, but it's a quality of life asset. So just does it provide enough value? Is it what you want? It's typically negative cash flow. So the best thing would be to have the ability to be able to eventually pay cash for it, set in another account. And if you could do that right now, because you have investments that if you got in trouble, you could pay it off, that's great. But I know that's a lot to ask, and it's not likely where most people are. Many people will make the mistake of shortening their loans to try to pay it off, or doing biweekly payments, adding an extra thing that can feel like a burden. But I want you to check out the video on how to finance your home the safest, most effective way so you can choose the best way for your situation. It's not a one-size-fit-all type of thing, but it's very important on making sure you protect your home, because there's been a lot of times people have to do short sales or foreclosures, and they lose it simply because they didn't make some choices and understanding of what we've covered in this video today. So I want you to take back control of your finances, hopefully even laugh and learn a little bit. And here's a very basic, simple checklist that I think helps illuminate what some of the blind spots are, or what sidetrack things can happen, what could really put people into financial trouble, that you could share with younger people that are trying to buy a home, or anyone that's out there trying to navigate this world. Now, if you have additional things that I missed in this video, go down in the comments. Let me know, what other things should people be considering when they're buying a home? What things were surprises to you, or that would have helped you to know beforehand? Let's do this as a community and help everyone else out there as kind of a way to have a public service announcement of like, hey, you're buying a home, one of the major purchases out there in the world. What are the things that you need to watch out for? All right, this is Garrett Gunderson. Build the life you love. Hey, you made it till the end, so I'm going to give you a bit of a bonus here. There's something called a money persona. It's like a money personality. And there's 4 different types out there. Which type are you? Well, once you understand, you'll know how to make better financial decisions and how to avoid the pitfalls and mistakes of what we call the shadow persona. So click the link, take the quiz, and if you feel so inclined, let us know which one you are.